Madam Chair, is it working? Madam Chair, uh, the Chancellor, the Vice Chancellor, Dr. Shivali Lavale, and members of the faculty and students. It's my privilege to be invited to speak on blue economy. It's an evolving concept which is at the cusp of two different disciplines, development economics and environment. And while this is a very valid concept, we need to understand more about it. As some of the previous speakers have brought out, we still have to understand the contours and the scope of this evolving discipline. But this exercise has to be attempted against the background of three caveats, which I would like to mention. One is that while we have to be prepared to understand and actually implement blue economy, this exercise has to be attempted against the background of geopolitics. Howsoever undesirable, we can't keep it from intruding. K.M. Panikkar, in his book Asia and Western Dominance, mentioned that Asian dominance by the West began with the maritime rivalry, and that rivalry culminated in the ascendancy of the British, and that was the beginning of the colonization of this area. Which brings me to the second point, that the countries, and this maritime rivalry is not over, it's very much still being played out. The actors have changed. The second element is that the littoral states of Indian Ocean, these are countries which have missed 2 centuries of industrialization. They are still on a learning curve, and for them to master the new technologies which are inherent in the concept of blue economy is a mammoth task, which is made more complex because there is no infusion of resources from outside. Yesterday, Secretary General IORA had brought out some of the excellent initiatives the IORA Secretariat has taken, and these need to be strengthened, but the basic problem is lack of resources. And the third element, of course, is the very limited capabilities of littoral states of Indian Ocean, especially to deal with some of the aspects of blue economy, which are also traditional aspects, and they are still very relevant, like port building, like shipping, and the new frontier areas of technology like offshore energy exploration or marine or extraction from deep sea bed mining, which are all very capital intensive, and they require high technology, which most of these countries do not have. But we do have to take some steps forward. Now, with this, with these caveats or limitations, we have to still address the concept. And can you just come? Sorry. The oceans cover 72% of the surface of our blue planet and constitute more than 95% of the biosphere. They also provide a substantial portion of the global population with food and livelihood, and they account for 80% of global trade. The new advancing technologies are opening new frontiers of marine resource development, from bioprospecting to the mining of seabed mineral resources. And of course, there is the potential for renewable energy from ocean, which includes wind, wave, tidal, thermal, and biomass sources, which some of my predecessors had covered in their presentation. Human development activities have seriously taxed the resilience of the marine and coastal resource space. 87% of the global fish stocks are fully or overexploited. Increasing pollution and climate change are new challenges. Climate change threatens to remove literally the, by increasing the CO2 levels, it contributes to increasing acidification, and it has changed the ocean chemistry at a speed much faster than any time in the past. The subsidies given by countries to fishing fleet account for something like $10 to $30 billion per year, and these in turn have an economic cost for other countries in the region, which is estimated at $50 billion per annum. Climate change includes both acidification as well as blue carbon. Acidification results, oceans are estimated to have absorbed about 25% of carbon dioxide since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, which has increased the acidity, and the destruction of coastal habitats, including mangroves, have led to a reduction of carbon sequestration, which is done more efficiently by mangroves and seagrass habitats than land-based forest cover. Shipping and port facilities are 80% of global trade by volume and 70% by value is carried by sea, and it's handled by ports worldwide. Offshore fields account for 32% of present crude oil production, and this is expected to rise to 35% in another 15 years period. As I mentioned earlier, the capacity of littoral states to handle for ports and shipping is rather limited. Intra-regional trade is, in terms of container movement, accounted for just 40% of the world container trade. Yesterday, one of the speakers pointed out that in IORA region itself, the intra-regional trade is rather low. It accounts for just 20% of their total trade. This figure is much higher for other regions, like in Atlantic Ocean, it is as high as 60%, which brings out the need for more regional cooperation. The ships of littoral states carry only a very small proportion of EXIM trade of IOR countries. More than 70% of the cargo is carried by international shipping companies. This is amongst the two major countries which have China and India. Here is a comparison of some of the parameters, and you would see that China leads in every one of these parameters. In terms of number of major ports, India has 13, China has 34. The fleet controlled, again, it's a 1:9 ratio between 734 ports in India and 4,770 ports in China. In terms of fleet, the ratio gets more skewed. It's almost 1:9 or 1:10, as against 23 million ton of fleet carrying capacity by India. It is 203 million ton for the Chinese fleet. The number of seafarers, both countries supply large number of seafarers to shipping companies the world over. The Chinese lead in this also. Sorry. Most of the shipping lines in the region belong to, these are international companies which belong to countries outside the region. This includes Maersk, which is Danish, MSC, CMA, CGM, NYK, Mitsui, which are Japanese, COSCO, which is Chinese. I would now touch briefly on the Indian contribution or the Indian initiatives. One of them is Sagarmala, and this was touched upon by the previous speakers. This initiative is born out of realization that logistics cost account for 19% in India, 19% of GDP, as against this percentage for other countries is around 12 to 13%. And one way to bring down the logistics cost is to vary the modal mix. In India, the road traffic carries about 55%, while the seaborne traffic is while the railways is just about 33%. Inland waterways and shipping is just around 6%. So we have to, the government is now trying to change this modal mix, and by developing inland waterways, the government is also trying to develop coastal shipping and cabotage by increasing the number of the ports. India currently is ranked 17th globally in terms of shipping tonnage. As against this, China ranks 7th globally. Now this is the most disturbing part, share of Indian shipping in terms of India's export-import trade or foreign trade has kept declining from 40% until 87-88 to 9% now. Now, lack of adequate shipping has an enormous economic cost. Payment of freight to foreign shipping lines amounts to $56 billion per annum. If this amount could be harnessed or utilized for building up our fleet capacity, this will go a long way in addressing the deficit in shipping. India has made 4 major contributions to shipping and port and shipping in the IOR region. One is the long-range identification and tracking system. This was also touched upon one of the speakers yesterday. I don't see him here, DG Shipping, Mr. Shetty, who in fact has helped me also with my presentation, a very knowledgeable person. This is already in existence, and it is now being reinforced by 2 of the satellite-based systems, Gagan, which is already operational, and a more ambitious Indian regional navigation satellite system, which is under development. The second major initiative is where I had the privilege of being associated with is the development of Chabahar Port, and third one is International North-South Transit Corridor, and the fourth is humanitarian assistance and counter-piracy operations. Chabahar Port in Iran, as you can see here, this is just on Iran's border with Pakistan. It's barely 80 kilometers from Gwadar. Chabahar has some distinct advantages. You know, the name incidentally, Chabahar, means 4 springs, which has the same meaning as in Urdu or Hindi. The port its main significance for Iranian side is that it lies outside the Strait of Hormuz, and it was being developed during Shah's period as a naval base. Indian participation, of course, is purely in terms of a civilian port, and the advantage of Chabahar Port, we are not in competition with Gwadar, but it has an inherent advantage. Chabahar is located in Iran, which has world's 2nd largest gas reserves, and Iran government under its 6th 5-year plan is developing Chabahar as the 3rd largest petrochemical hub in that country. So there's a Chabahar free trade zone which is coming up here, and which will be supplied by a pipeline which is nearly complete. They have completed about 900 kilometers of pipeline. It has reached a place called Iran Shah, just north of Chabahar. There is still a 300-kilometer segment which is to be completed. And incidentally, it is the same pipeline which will dip south to Chabahar. It will feed Chabahar Free Trade Zone, and then it will go eastward into Pakistan, Iran-Pakistan pipeline, which is a truncated version of the earlier Iran-Pakistan-India pipeline. So Chabahar has this inherent advantage of access to cheap gas and abundant gas, which hopefully will generate enough traffic for the port. Second, Chabahar also, if you look at the map and we go to the next slide, it is just south of oil-rich countries of Central Asia, Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan. This is about 1,200 kilometers distance, and there's a midway point is Zahedan. I think this map is not quite accurate. Zahedan is slightly up north here on Afghanistan border, and from there, there's a road which goes into Afghanistan and links up with the Zaranj-Delaram road, and this is the Zaranj-Delaram section, and that in turn links up to what is called the Garland road in Afghanistan, which goes around the country and covers all the major cities, including Kandahar, Kabul, Herat. Now, the other major potential of Chabahar is that it will provide ocean connectivity to not only to Afghanistan but also to 5 Central Asian states. In fact, during our Prime Minister Modi's visit to these countries earlier this year, this was one point which was most warmly received by all his interlocutors. Chabahar port is very close to India. In fact, the sailing distance between Chabahar and Kandla is just about a day and a half. It makes it much closer than Bandar Abbas, which is further west. And Kandla is closer to Chabahar than Kandla is to Cochin or even to Mumbai. And the advantage there was of Chabahar over Bandar Abbas, which is somewhere here. Bandar Abbas is in the Strait of Hormuz, and Bandar Abbas it's a developed port, but it is congested port with a turnaround time for ships for 7 to 8 days. Chabahar will be much faster. This is a diagram of the port, which is still under development, but it is a functioning port. The throughput is around 2 million ton, and phase 1 is already complete. Phase 2 is under development. The capacity will go up from 2 million ton to 6 million ton to 20 million ton, and then eventually to 84 million ton. The third major initiative which Indian government has taken is International North-South Transit Corridor. And this also starts from Iran. This is the starting point or culmination point, which is but natural because it links the landlocked Central Asia with warm water ports in the Gulf, and incidentally, this covers not only CIS countries but also Russia and Azerbaijan, Georgia, Armenia. So in fact, this INSTC route, once it is developed, this will provide ocean connectivity to almost 12 countries, 5 of the CIS states, Russia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia, and of course you have Afghanistan here and Iran itself. Now you can see from the map, we have these straight arrows which you see, the road or the rail lines don't run. This is not exact depiction of the road network, but this is just to indicate the major terminals here. The Bandar Abbas port is linked to Amirabad port on the Caspian seashore, as well as which is on the eastern part of Iran's Caspian shoreline, and on Astara port, which is on the western part of Iran's Caspian shoreline. From Astara, goods can be shipped either to Astara Khan, either by ship, or they can be sent over land by truck. There is also a land crossing in Barun, which was inaugurated by presidents of Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Iran sometime in December 2014, and this is already functional. We had a delegation from our Commerce Ministry, and they have visited. and I had visited. Then there's a crossing point here, Saraks, which is on Turkmenistan-Afghanistan border, which again is connected by road all the way from Bandar Abbas. The road network is kind of semicircular. It goes west from Bandar Abbas to Tehran, and then it loops back eastward to Mashhad and then Saraks. INSTC will also reduce by almost 40% the travel time to Moscow and St. Petersburg. The existing route goes around Europe to St. Petersburg, and then the goods are shipped by road to Moscow. This one, INSTC will cut through Iran and Caspian Sea. From Astrakhan to Moscow, there's an existing railway line which needs to be improved, but it already exists. So much of the infrastructure along INSTC already exists. There has been a lot of discussion about OBOR, or Maritime Silk Route. Unlike OBOR, which is a concept in development, INSTC infrastructure already exists. With only little bit of investment, you can increase the traffic considerably, which requires also more awareness amongst the businessmen. Commerce Ministry has taken some of the initiatives to organize these meetings, and another meeting is going to take place soon. This is a map which shows Chabahar also is part of this north-south transit corridor. This shows the road link from Chabahar to Zahedan to Dilaram and Afghanistan, and then also this route, there's a both rail connection and road connection from here to Mashhad, and then onwards through Central Asia. The fourth major contribution India has made is in terms of humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. We have conducted such operations, including provision of fresh water in Maldives, evacuation from Yemen, and during Yemen operations, we contributed 3 ships, Mumbai, Tarkash, and Sumitra, and the operation resulted in evacuation of 3,000 personnel, including 1,800 Indians and about 1,300 foreign nationals. India has also contributed to counter piracy efforts in the region. So far, a total of 59 Indian naval ships have been deployed in the Gulf of Aden, and during this period, 3,300 ships have been escorted by Indian Navy. This included 379 Indian flagged vessels and 2,900 foreign flagged vessels. Thank you.